Well, hello, traders and investors. I'm L.A. Little, and this is your weekly NeoTA wrap, where we take a look at these markets, and we do it from a neoclassical perspective. Each time we're asking ourselves what happened last week. What might it tell us about the coming ones? Do the show 4 times? No, actually do the show once a week. Every Sunday evening, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's archived on YouTube. It's under the channel L.A. Little. Of course, I do the daily show 4 times a week. That's Monday through Thursday of each week. As far as what's happening, let's take a look at some of the numbers from last week, where we had a continuation of the down move, right? We've had 6 weeks now, a lot of pressure on these markets. They had a big rally on Friday, and as a matter of fact, if you were a member, you knew that that was probably the case, right? Here at the Get Started button, if you are interested in what we do, and if you want to benefit from what we do, you might come over and check it out. All right, we've got all these things. One of the big things is the chat rooms. In the chat rooms, I did notify members on Thursday before the close, about an hour before the close, that the setup was there potentially to make the buys. I called out the QQQs, but you could have bought anything on the indexes. Got the big bump up on Friday. And those Friday numbers you can see here on the quote system, right? Friday you got, what is it, 1.95, 1.66, 144, 192. That was on Friday. Made the call Thursday before those numbers took place. And, you know, if you are an investor, even if you're swing trading or even if you want to day trade, you know, these are the kinds of calls that you need to make money. And I make these calls on a regular basis, and subscribers of TA Today, members of the site, they benefit from it just as you could, and you could do it for a reasonable rate, you know, $19 a month, $175 a year, less than $15 a month if you go for the yearly quote to get that kind of information. It's priceless, folks. And you know, I don't always I'm not always right, but a lot of the times I am right and will make you some money as a result. You had pressure in Hong Kong. That Hong Kong market, if you remember, we were thinking on Thursday it was going to try to hold higher. It was unable to. And so that's a telling us again that Asia is pretty weak. But you've got a big reversal taking place tonight here in the Nikkei. And that call I made on Thursday in terms of the indexes is probably going to benefit from that. China starts trading again tonight, and I suspect China, even though they've got to do some catching up to do on the downside, they're probably going to surprise us and do a little bit better than we expect on the upside. If we look elsewhere, gold pulls back a little bit. We started having the currencies flip around, and I suspect the currencies are going to be the real story this week if they can hold in that higher range now that they're in, and I'm speaking of the euro and the yen, without going any higher. They're going to ease back in some, hold that higher range. That's going to allow these markets to try and work a bit higher themselves. So moving back to the big picture here, down huge on the year so far. That hasn't changed. What has changed is what may be coming next. So let's take a look at this. I've actually got the gold miners up. Let me grab the one I want, as I was flipping through a bunch of charts here before we got started. So here's the FXE. So FXE, if we pull it to a weekly, which is the key levels we should be looking at in particular on this show, you know, you had an ABCD structure. This is the euro, right? You had an ABCD structure to take it higher. It did. It took it right up here to the top of the breakdown bar. That's probably going to try to retrace. I wouldn't be surprised if it came all the way back to do the retest, regenerate bullish. In other words, come back to the swing point high you broke out, try to test into it, and then try to move higher again. If you look at it on this time frame, you can see the ranges pretty clear, right? You had a range there, you got another range up above it. It's already kind of done that. Now the question is, are you going to get some sort of a pullback and you hold in this higher range, and then eventually maybe try to move higher? If it does, that's going to help the DAX, the CACs, Swiss market, all the European, you know, markets, Italy, so forth, and allow them, equities-wise, to try to push higher. You got Draghi with a speech this week that could also play into it. but it looks to me like Europe's going to try to go sideways to bounce, at least to start this week. How we finish may be a different story, but that looks like the start of it. If you go to the yen, now the yen had the huge move up as well. Here's the yen on a weekly basis. You've got the ranges we've talked about before, and the yen just pretty much finished off that range, it looks like. And so if, again, as I said at the top of the show, they hold in these ranges, I expect those other markets, Asia, Europe, to try to work higher. And if that's the case, we'll probably see higher price here. Moving on back to the indexes, let's start with the domestic ones. And we'll start here with the S&P 500. Now the S&P actually came down and tested that January high volume low. It's exactly what you would like it to do if you're bullish. Test it with less volume, flip around. You get the move off of it. That was the call I was making on Thursday when I told members you had a good chance to make some money on the upside finally. And, those are the kind of calls you got to make in a market like this. How far can it go? Well, we'll find out. But I've told members of my target what I believe we can get to. And that, if they're going to stick around and try to make the money, that's what they want to shoot for. That's the S&P on the daily. If you look at it on the weekly, you also got a test of the lows, and you got a test of the lows with lighter volume. If you move out to the monthly, it's also testing there and testing the October lows. And if you run the numbers, we actually may end up with more volume this month than we did at the October lows, which longer term would be bearish. If you move to the NASDAQ breaks under the lows. Now it's back testing. What is it doing when it tests? Well, it's doing a bearish retest regenerate. Where's the high? Where's the low? That's the target. So if you're thinking target on the NASDAQ, you're thinking, hey, we're going to try to run towards this high. If this really has enough juice in it, then we should see it try to get to those price points. If you move it to the weekly and see what those look like, here on the NASDAQ, you actually tested the swing point low back from August. You got under it, back over it, a little less volume. This is going to try and push higher. It's a hammer reversal at the lows. And again, if you're bullish, that's exactly what you would like to see. Moving on to the small caps, the Russells, they break under the swing point low, and they flip around and recapture it the very next day on the daily charts. On the weekly charts, they get under a hello, less volume, hammer reversal. Again, looks as if it wants to move higher. If we move overseas, and starting with the DAX, if we look at it on daily, you got a break of a swing point low that's off the chart to the left-hand side. You didn't get the kind of reversal you would like here, but a little bit of a push up with a little bit of volume on Friday. If you bring it to the weekly, you're getting that follow through. Remember, we had the break on multiple time frames, which typically leads to a faster move to the downside, which is exactly what you saw last week. This week we could probably get some sort of sideways to up action and potentially another down leg after that. That's the typical process on this kind of a move. Here's the target, right? The swing point low back in October of 2014. Again, the break of the ledge. I could see it bouncing back up to that ledge, testing, and probably getting pushed back down at that level. France, if you look at France, you have the same case. You didn't get a good turn, but it did get a push. You got the follow through off the DAX, also targeting those swing point lows. I'm going to add a new one in today, Switzerland. Getting a little bit of a following over there, so I want to touch on their markets. So Switzerland also, it's got the same case, didn't get the volume on it. I'm looking at the SMI. Now what I would note here on Switzerland is on the weekly, you have the ABCD structure, right, that has completed. So you've gotten the 1,000-point push down off the top, or actually a little less than about 900. You do the numbers here, about the same. Looks to me like it's going to come back into the swing point low. Moving over to Asia, the Shanghai, of course, closed all last week. So the question will be is what does it do this week? If we look at the Nikkei had already pushed down, maybe some sort of a blow-off bottom there in terms of the high volume lows. Nikkei, just like we were talking about in Europe, could come back to test these swing point lows on a weekly time frame, and on the monthly time frame, you know, it's almost finished off, or it looks like it's just about finished off the ABCD structure. So a bounce there, a bounce in the yen, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If we look at the other half of the Chinese equation, which is Hong Kong, in the Hong Kong market, you know, we were talking about here, it looked like it was going to try to hold on Thursday. Well, it didn't on Friday, traded underneath. I'm suspecting, though, that, you know, just given what I'm seeing elsewhere, this is probably going to try to bounce back. It's just sloppy action is what it looks like to me. So coming back to the U.S. markets and this big test here that failed, right? A test failure after a big decline, right? A bounce and a test failure, that can get you another move right back up towards the highs. Now, there's nothing here that's going to, you know, tell us at this point that that's the kind of move you're going to get. That's a possibility. Another possibility is simply to get to the high of the low, and that would be the first target, right? So when you're watching this play out this week, you want to watch that level and see how it attacks it. Can it get over it? Can it trade up here and stay up there? In which case, it can go after the swing point high. What are we going to do this week? Well, I suspect we're going to start off with some strength once we get trading after the holiday. And, you know, whether that strength can hold or not, well, I should take it back. We should get strength to begin after the holiday. The fact that we're on a holiday, right, means that other markets are going to influence us to some extent before we get going. But I wouldn't be surprised to see these markets try to move higher and try to come up and test into those highs of the lows this week. That's it for tonight. As always, I ask you to tell a friend, tell two. I also want to thank you because I see a number of you doing that. I really appreciate it. You take care. Have a great week and a remaining part of the holiday here, and we will get started afterwards. Take care and good night.